And now for your top story this hour. European leaders, including Finnish President Alexander Stubb and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, have arrived in Ukraine to mark the 4-year anniversary of Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga welcomed them, highlighting the solidarity of the Nordic-Baltic 8 in supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom and justice. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has also arrived in Kyiv, where she is greeted by Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga with a bouquet of yellow and blue flowers. Her visit underscores the EU's continued commitment to Ukraine amid ongoing conflict with Russia. To the top. Minister Ulf Kristersson has arrived in Ukraine to mark the 4-year anniversary of Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga welcomed them, highlighting the solidarity of the Nordic-Baltic 8 in supporting Ukraine's fight for freedom and justice. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also arrived in Kyiv, where she was greeted by Ukraine's Foreign Minister with a bouquet of yellow and blue flowers. We're now being joined by Saul Sadka, who's a political commentator joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Saul, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. How can EU's visits and declarations of solidarity be translated into concrete political, military and economic support, especially amid stalled sanctions and aid debates within the bloc?
Well, the Europeans over the past 4 years of Putin's 3-day war, entering now its 5th year, have completely failed to live up to what they were supposed to do for standing by Ukraine. They have tried their best. However, the problem is that they've been put in such a situation by their previous leaders, such as Angela Merkel in particular, that it made it very difficult for them really to sanction Russia in the way that they needed to, in a way that would cause them pain points. Because of that, the war has dragged on a lot longer than it needed to. So for their visits into Kyiv are a symbolic gesture, which is nowhere near as good as it would have been to do actually more material aspects to the sanctions. But hopefully this will be a turning point. Who knows? Certainly the Russians are currently on the back foot, if not technically on the battlefield. Their economy is grinding itself into the dust and will eventually grind to a halt, whereas Ukraine, on the other hand, is receiving essentially an infinite supply of Western aid to keep it afloat. The Russians do not have that, and there's no one to back up Russia. And so when Russia runs out of money, that's the end.
And how might this anniversary visit influence the ongoing peace negotiations, including expectation for future talks and security guarantees?
Well, the ongoing talks seem to have ground to a halt. It's been going on for really since the beginning, but since Trump came in more than a year ago at this point, they've been at full force. You have people like Witkoff making efforts in that regard. And so far, they have yielded nothing. And the reason they've yielded nothing is because, while, as we mentioned, Russia is destroying its economy and turning it into a few cornfields in Ukraine, the Ukrainians are in no such position. So the Russians are destroying their economy, but as soon as they stop the war, then the gas that they've been pumping into their economy by turning their economy into a fully war economy evaporates, and at that point it will crash. So Putin can't stop the war because that will be the end of him. But in the long run, he can't continue the war because he will simply run out of resources.
And with the war, obviously, on their 4th year for the anniversary, what long-term reconstruction and recovery challenges are Ukraine facing, and what role should Europe play in addressing them? As we know, Russia are targeting energy infrastructure and railways quite often, and it's looking like, even though the EU are giving them a lot of aid with lots of money, Russia seem to constantly try and go after how their humanitarian aid is needed more than military aid, I feel like, at the minute. What do you think?
Yes, well, the situation currently is that Ukraine is digging in. They're digging vast networks of trenches and rebutments to make it very difficult for the Russians to advance very much farther than they already have. And for the world's second greatest military, as people were describing them 4 years ago, the fact that they really managed to barely move 100 kilometers from their own borders is absolutely embarrassing. And my guess is that even though the aid for Ukraine is insufficient and should be higher, it is sufficient to allow them to continue hanging on, to continue holding the line, more or less, while Russia trades vast numbers of their own young men and military stockpiles for small tracts of territory with minimal value. As they continue to do that, the war will grind to a halt, and at some point, it is likely to reverse. And it will continue to go very, very slowly until suddenly, at some point, the Ukrainians find some kind of chink that they can take advantage of and will move forward, or simply, as we've already seen, a mutiny in the Russian ranks. Their top general, if you recall, about 2 years ago, turned his tanks and men around and headed north to Moscow. And that was only stopped by some kind of last-minute deal. And then he was assassinated a few months after that. So the situation there is very uncertain, but Russia is certainly a lot weaker than some of the people who will come on your program will tell you they are. They have a veneer of strength, but their weapons are insufficient. They're incapable of matching up to Western weapons. And right now, the war has shifted into a kind of unusual trench war, but one that is bolstered by drones in every direction. So both sides are using every day tens of thousands of drones. If the reports are true, and there is evidence that they are, the Russians are losing more than 30,000 men every day to death and tens of thousands more to injury. The Russians will soon enough have to end this war. But as we said, if they do end the war, their economy collapses. And they have lost so much. Russia will never be the same after this war. Even if Russia managed to capture the 4 regions that they have demanded from the Ukrainians, if they manage to do that, and there's no prospect of that happening soon, the result would be for them complete economic catastrophe, complete isolation from the rest of the world. They have lost 1 million men to death and serious injury, and they have lost millions more young people who have left Russia. Their best and brightest have left Russia and now live in Dubai, and they live in Morocco. Some of them have moved to Egypt and Turkey. Some are living in Europe, and some have moved to the United States. Those people will never return. That will be ultimately the biggest price they will pay, that those million plus young people, their best and brightest, are lost to them. And as we go into the next generation or two, where the world is constantly going to be under pressure for young, capable talent, as population shrinks in Western countries, including Russia, but Russia's population has been shrinking for decades already, those people are gold for an economy, and they have lost those things. And all they have to show for this is a couple of thousand square kilometers of farmland now riddled with mines and weaponry in Western Ukraine. And to get that, they have traded actually trillions of potential value from their economy.
Thank you so much, Saul, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. Ukrainian